Asia-Pacific. Where to from here? We're talking about the world's fastest growing region, a region that is home to 6 of Canada's top 13 trading partners. A region that may play, and I emphasize the word may play, a critical role in shaping Canada's future over the next half century.
Hello, I'm Stuart McNish, and you're listening to Conversations Live. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series addressing the big issues of our time. For each episode, we bring together subject matter experts for a deep conversation designed to provide you with information that helps you make more informed decisions. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to Conversations Live. Asia-Pacific. Where to from here is our title, our working title. And tonight we come to you from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations, who have lived on and continue to call these lands home. Ossium. Tonight, what was for quite some time known as Asia-Pacific has now morphed into Indo-Pacific, a region that may play, and I emphasize the word may play, a critical role in shaping Canada's future over the next half century. Within the Indo-Pacific, there are 40 economies that are home to more than 4 billion people who collectively generate more than $47 trillion in economic activity today, and those economies are all growing. In other words, we're talking about the world's fastest growing region, a region that is home to 6 of Canada's top 13 trading partners. The Indo-Pacific region represents significant opportunities for growing the economy here at home, as well as opportunities for Canadian workers and businesses for decades to come. And it's clear, it's important that we capitalize on those opportunities. Just last week, Stats Canada reported that Canadian GDP shrank by 1.1% as compared to a 5% increase in the United States. It's a bit of a damning indicator on the direction Canada is headed, especially when it comes to our ability to do business internationally. The questions tonight are economic in nature, but such as will we step up and deliver on the products and services that the Indo-Pacific region requires? Or will we watch those opportunities pass us by? There are many challenges we face if we hope to derive economic benefits from the region. And frankly, many of the impediments to our future success, well, they are self-generated. And while it's true we have created barriers, could those barriers also serve as safeguards? So, as we seek to expand our presence in Indo-Pacific, we have to be aware that doing so brings with it security risks. Are we inviting trouble at home? Are we risking intellectual property and also putting Canadians at risk abroad? Now, just before we begin, I'm going to express my wholehearted gratitude to our sponsors who have made Conversations Live a reality. They are Stem Cell Technologies. Oh, sorry, I got to start with our presenting sponsors. Very important. KPMG, who's hosting us tonight, RBC, and the magnificent Helijet. Our event sponsors are Stem Cell Technologies, Fortis BC, Landlord BC, Polygon, Beatty, the Port of Vancouver, I promise it's not too long of a list, the Digital Technology Supercluster, Research Co., and our media partner is the Vancouver Sun. BCIT is also a supporter. And I want to especially thank Apogee Public Relations and give a big shout out to my team at Oh Boy Productions, who are experts in online and virtual event production like this and live video press conferences. That's our little plug. One last thing for everyone who may wish to pose a question. Please go to slido.com, enter the password conversations, and send in your question. Sean, our Slido master over here, will be receiving your questions and bringing them forward to us. Now, we won't be able to get to them all, but I have to tell you they really help us as we develop topics and questions that we'll be asking the panel this evening. So to further set the stage, here is Mario Canseco of Research Co., who just conducted a poll for us about our opinions on and about the importance of our business and diplomatic relationships that stretch halfway around the world. Samaya, can you please play Mario's video?
35 years have passed since the signing of the original free trade agreement between Canada and the United States. In 2023, for more than two-thirds of Canadians, the time to diversify and be less dependent on our neighboring nation is now. This is a view that is remarkably consistent across the four most populous provinces, rising to 73% in British Columbia. Just over half of Canadians believe economic and political relations with Asia should be a major focus of the country's foreign policy. This idea is favored by two-thirds of Albertans and 3 in 5 BC residents, but finds lower support in Ontario. In Quebec, skepticism about Asia gaining foreign policy significance is markedly higher. In spite of earlier controversies related to Asian involvement in Canadian industries, just over half of Canadians believe the country stands to gain if Asian countries choose to invest more. As expected, British Columbians are at the top of the list, with practically 3 in 5 foreseeing benefits for the whole country if additional Asian investment is welcome. The appetite of Asian markets for Canada's energy resources has not gone unnoticed across the country. 3 in 5 Canadians think it is imperative for the country to develop strategies that would allow Canadian resources to reach these new markets. In BC, where discussions about LNG exports have been dominant for the past decade, agreement with this course of action reaches 71%. While Canadians are keenly aware of the trade opportunities presented by Asia, our views on whether Canada is a component of the Asia-Pacific region are varied. Fewer than 3 in 10 Albertans, Ontarians, and Quebecers believe this is the case, while majorities question whether Canada belongs in this group of nations. While the perception of BC residents is slightly more positive, only 42% consider Canada a part of the Asia-Pacific region. For Conversations Live, I'm Mario Canseco from ResearchGo.
Thank you, Mario. We have an amazing panel tonight who will dig beneath the surface of this very important topic. Sitting next to me is Sukesh Kumar, who is the audit partner and national leader of KPMG's India practice in Canada. And he also sits on the advisory council of the Canada-India Business Council. Next to Sukesh is Duncan Wilson, the Vice President of Environment and External Affairs at the Port of Vancouver. Next to Duncan is Dr. Indira Samarai Sakara, a former president and vice chancellor of the University of Alberta and a member of the board of TransCanada Energy, Magna International, and Stelco. I should also note that David Turpin, another former president and vice chancellor of the University of Alberta and the former president of the University of Victoria, joins us in the audience this evening. David, thanks for joining us. Mike DeYoung, MLA for Abbotsford West and the shadow cabinet member for the Attorney General, joins us. And joining us virtually is Jeff Nankervell, the president and CEO of the Asia-Pacific Foundation of Canada. Jeff is joining us remotely from Ottawa, where he is part of an event that is taking place there with the Canada West Foundation on this very topic today and tomorrow. We also have a video comments from Paul Thoppel, Canada's Indo-Pacific Trade Representative, Senator Yuanpao Wu, and supply chain specialist from the Sauder School of Business, Samuel Roscoe. Samaya, just before I turn to the panel, will you please play the clip from Paul Thoppel, Canada's new trade minister to Indo-Pacific?
It's about understanding that we need to deepen the relationship in what I would say is a sustained way, because Asian culture requires relationships before you transact the business. But fundamentally, it's about where the growth is in the world. And according to the IMF, the large economy growth is in India. And from a regional perspective, the fastest growth is in Southeast Asia. So from a Canadian economic prosperity perspective, we need to engage where the growth is in order to have more growth in our economy. And we also have to acknowledge that our national trade exposure as a nation is not as diversified as it should be. And as we look at rising protectionism around the world, and as we look at geopolitical risks, having a diversified national trade portfolio that also incorporates a strong element of growth is fundamental to Canada's future success. And that's what the Indo-Pacific strategy subscribes to, which is a commitment which is long-term. So it's not a transitional document, it's a 10-year strategy. And we know that based on that degree of commitment, based on a significant investment by the federal government, which is $2.3 billion over 5 years, and calling for a midterm review to course correct based on what we see in the region, what has worked, what has not worked. That sincerity that we're telegraphing to Asian governments and to Asian businesses, and most importantly, to our own citizens, is going to be, I think, the key elements of what I believe will be a successful strategy.
Duncan, I'd like to start with you. You've just come back from the region. When you listen to Mr. Thoppel, is what he's saying resonating with your experience there? And are we at a very important intersection in what can be opportunities for Canada?
Thanks, Stu. Well, definitely. There's a tremendous amount of interest in Asia and in the Indo-Pacific region in terms of doing business with Canada, and I think we have there's a brand value, if you will, of we're a stable country, reliable trading partner. We have things that these countries need, and hopefully we'll hear more tonight about other things that we can do to provide exports to those countries. And we also we have a robust import trade with many of these countries. While I was in Asia, we were in several countries, and the consistent theme is that. And there's also a very large focus on decarbonization and working with us on those matters. And also investment. And so when I heard you mention in your opening remarks the possibility of investment, that is clearly a focus. And I know there's a lot more focus on that now here in Canada in terms of the kinds of foreign investment that Canada wants to welcome. And so clearly that's something that we need to discuss. But there's a lot of interest in doing business here, investing here, doing trade with us. Looking at the volumes, we're seeing a consistent pattern overall in the basket of the 40 countries of the Indo-Pacific of increasing trade. In each economy, it varies year to year, and as you expect, there'll be cyclical patterns. But we're seeing a very consistent pattern of increase.
Sukesh, you have also come back recently from the region and also been interacting and visiting with many people who are having these high-level discussions. Where are we at? Are we at the talking stage, or are we actually starting to get down to realizing opportunities?
Yeah, I think if you look at the region itself, clearly, if you look at the Indo-Pacific strategy, and you heard Paul talk about it, the opportunity that exists at this stage right now. I think the challenge we have as a country is we have a big elephant just down south that we keep on trading, and it's easier, similar kind of time zones, similar way of doing things. But the biggest thing that I think Paul touched upon that we have to focus on is the diversification. We have to get out and look for new markets, and Indo-Pacific clearly provides that opportunity. Maybe later on, I'd love to come back to one, in particular that I focus on in India a little bit. But if you look at the whole region itself, you look at, 3 of the largest, 5 economies right now are in that region at this stage, and they will become even bigger player. You look at the consumption that's taking place right now, I think they're expecting that by 2040, the world's GDP, 50% of the GDP is going to come from that region. So I think if you go through that, I think it's very critical for us to get engaged. Now, coming to your question, I think we are talking about it. We have to put things into action on both sides. The government is there to play a role of an enabler, but the industry also have to get engaged and get serious about taking the opportunity and looking at that region, both for investment, trade, immigration, young workforce. You look at the students. So it becomes a very, very critical market for us to really focus on because like Canada is a trading country. If we don't have a trade, we don't have our lifestyle as good as you got right now. So we really have to focus on it and push hard as we move forward.
Well, I think it's interesting that you touched on talking about students. That is a multifaceted topic all on its own. And Indira, I know that you're on the boards of 3 organizations that are very interested in, exploring opportunities in the region. But in your role as president of the University of Alberta, you in essence were selling education. And there is a market that we can look at and say, what have we done right? And what can other industries learn from that?
So, thank you, Stu. Can you hear me?
Yep.
One of the things that I think we have done right is we have made Canadian universities attractive for students from that part of the world. And certainly my colleague here, David, can probably attest to that because he was part of that rapid increase in students from that part of the world into the undergraduate programs. That's been good. Some challenges, though, and we've all read about it, around issues with students being promised potential work permits and so on, and not delivering those permits, and students coming here and being truly disappointed. So we've got to address that. But I think there's something that we need to do better. We need to have more surgical precision when it comes to our approach. And I'll take India. I went to India every year for 10 years because the number of Indian students we were attracting was quite modest compared to China. And we had to diversify. And the country that has done extremely well in attracting Indian students is the United States of America. The Indian IITs, which graduate 10,000 unbelievable, bright engineers, go straight to graduate school. In fact, when I visited, the whole class had offers from Stanford and Berkeley and wherever they wanted to go. We don't position ourselves like that. And the result in the US has been 30% of the Fortune 500 CEOs are Indians, many of them from IIT. 30% of the engineers in the Silicon Valley come from those IITs. So all this to say, we've done some things well, but we got to go a lot more strategic. And we have to go after the kind of talent that will bring us the kind of entrepreneurial energy that I think has been manifest in the US by virtue of that approach.
Well, having those students here going to school builds future relationships with them, even if they return home.
Right.
So it's a very important part of a long-term strategy.
Right.
And I think that we have to get away from the idea of looking at this as though somehow, they're taking seats from Canadian students. Actually, it's the development of long-term relationships, which Paul Thoppel had said is fundamental in our development. Jeff, I see you nodding away there, and clearly you're in agreement. Your thoughts on sort of initially as we're moving forward, and also what are you hearing out of the conference that you're at in Ottawa today?
Well, first of all, in terms of moving forward, and in terms of the growth story in Asia, I think there's an important thing to understand about the nature of the growth in Asia. So a percentage point of growth in an Asian economy these days offers different market opportunities than a percentage point of growth in the U.S. economy or a Western European economy, or even for the more mature developed economies like Japan and Korea. So talking about emerging economies, each percentage point of growth in these countries, like in Southeast Asia and South Asia, that have very favorable demographics. They've got lots of new young people coming into the labor force each year, but they've also got, every time economic growth ticks up, you have millions of households who are crossing income thresholds each year, which means their consumption habits are changing. They're starting to buy different types of goods and services. They are able to afford education abroad for their young people. They are interested in consumer products of a type that in which Canada excels in areas like nutritional supplements and very high quality packaged foods of different kinds and higher quality ingredients. And these are consumers whose tastes are still developing, and they haven't been shaped, by a century of advertising and brand loyalty. Very hard to claw market share away from established players in consumer markets in places like Western Europe and the US and even Canada. But there's an opportunity in the fact that these economies are transforming, and you have millions of people joining the middle class and moving up through the ranks of the middle class. And that offers growth opportunities for higher and higher value products from Canada. In terms of the conference I'm at, it's looking at a year of experience since the federal government released its Indo-Pacific strategy in late November of last year. And we've had speakers from kind of different sectors. We've also had speakers from Australia and the US looking at Canada comparatively, and from Japan, and kind of taking stock of how things are going so far. And I think I would say that there is something of a consensus, which is that the plan that was unveiled by the government last year is an ambitious one. It's to be commended for being ambitious, and these kinds of grand strategies are very rare for Canadian governments, especially in the area of foreign policy. So there was some talk about A, for effort for the plan, and the fact that there are resources to back it up. There are increased resources in the area of defense, in people-to-people exchanges. I should say, in the interest of full disclosure, that the Asia-Pacific Foundation of Canada, with our headquarters in Vancouver, will itself be receiving resources that will enable us for the first time to open up an office in Singapore and stand up new programs in Southeast Asia to aim squarely at helping to build connections between Southeast Asia and Canada. But I would say the consensus of the discussion was that the plan is not bad. It's taking time to roll out, but that's to be expected. As Mr. Topol mentioned, it's a 10-year plan. But that really, it remains to be seen if the government and the other partners who have to be a part of this, the provinces, the private sector, the educational sector, and so on, are going to be able to build momentum and then sustain it over time. And that's the main thing that our partners and potential partners in the region, in the Indo-Pacific region, are watching for. They've seen Canadian enthusiasm wax and wane over the years. They want to see if this time there will be staying power in what Canadians are pursuing, and whether we'll stay in it for the long run.
So, Mike, you bring a different perspective to the panel. You've been back and forth in and out of the region as a member of government. How important are those relationships on a government-to-government basis? And do they have to be national to national, or can they be state to province?
Well, it can be both, but I'm going to carve out some space here as the contrarian on the panel.
How unusual.
How unusual, Stu. By disagreeing with something you said right at the outset. You said the Indo-Pacific may greatly influence. Now, you're being timid.
Why?
It's going to influence. It's going to, for better or for worse, and we can determine that. We can decide how it is going, but it is going to influence us. India is going to influence. Asia Pacific is going to influence it. For the reasons you've just heard from the panel. The economic impact is too great. I was thinking as I listened, I didn't know I was going to see Carol Taylor here tonight. I'm going to violate something that you're not supposed to violate: cabinet secrecy. Carol was the finance minister, and she said something that I never forgot. She said, this country and this province, but this country need to think of Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific in the same way we thought of Europe after the Second World War, when the country devoted what would have been billions of dollars to the St. Lawrence Seaway project. We are the gateway. We are the gateway not just into Canada, but into North America. Are the relationships at the governmental level important? Of course they are. And they set the trend, but we are, this might not be the most politic thing to say, we are as a country horribly timid. We are horribly timid when it comes to forging these relationships. We tend to follow. We tend to follow when we think it's safe to do so. And you want to achieve an advantage, you need to be there first. I mean, Duncan talked about increases in cargo rates. I think that's great. I think it's the relationships are complicated right now. Let's be honest about that. So I'm glad to hear that the volumes are up. But let's not kid ourselves. No one wakes up in India and says, I wonder what they're thinking in Canada today. I mean, I wish they did, but they don't. So we have to be in their face. We have to be there in education. We have to be there in commerce. We have to be there in shipping and saying to them how we can provide them with something that they want at a competitive price. And we're not, bluntly, we're not that good at that.
Thus my statement about it may really shape our future. But if you take a look back over the course of the last decade, there were 9 LNG projects that were proposed. Here we are right now, not one of them is finished. LNG Canada is close. The Haisla are waiting on a final investment decision on their Cedar LNG, and I'm not entirely sure what the final outcome is going to be of wood fiber. So have we built in structures in Canada that prevent us from realizing these opportunities? And that's the motivation behind my question. Indira, I see you nodding, and then Mike, I know that you want to jump back in, but we'll come back in a sec.
Well, yeah, I'm nodding because LNG is sort of near and dear to my heart, being on the board of TC Energy.
Yes.
That's been building this coastal gas link to, thank God, mechanically complete, 100% complete. So I think we're getting there. But just a little bit of history here, very briefly. If you look at what happened when the Russia-Ukraine war started, right? Natural gas prices spiked 6 times. Asia was suddenly facing a shortage of natural gas because the US was shipping all of their LNG to Europe. How did US end up with all that LNG? Well, while we were trying to get permits to build 12 projects, we built 0. They built, second only to Australia, the largest LNG export terminals in the Gulf Coast. So I think that, and what got in our way? Market, certainly, regulation. This country cannot approve infrastructure in order to save ourselves, right? We get in our way. And I think the biggest tragedy has been the lost decade of building serious export capacity in LNG. And let me add, LNG from British Columbia, Carol, both of you were in cabinet, would know this well, right? It's the most environmentally friendly LNG because electrification is using hydro, shortest distances to Asia, and cheapest LNG, cheapest natural gas in the Montney Formation. So you can tell I'm not passionate about this subject at all. Right?
And reducing greenhouse
gas emissions by displacing coal. So I think with energy security back on the map and climate change never off the map, we have got to redouble our effort to get out of the regulatory impasse that we've put in front of us and be a major player in the energy business.
Well, as Parent Beatty recently said, we've developed a reputation as a country that can't build anything.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, here is an opportunity we have to lock arms with a segment of our Canadian society that has languished too long in all of the areas that matter most, that have not benefited from the great Canadian experience. First Nations, Aboriginal peoples, who have stepped forward now and said, we want to be part of this. We actually want to be partners in the development of this sector that has benefits worldwide. I mean, you've got a bit of a choir developing here, and I have to be on my best behavior because two presidents of the university I graduated from are here. So if I'm not, they'll hold me to account. But I actually passionately believe that this is an opportunity that we have almost squandered, but not quite. And I cling to that, Stu, that not quite. There's still an opportunity for us.
Duncan, infrastructure that needs to be in place for us to realize our trading relationship with all of these countries in Indo-Pacific. Where are we at from your perspective? Because you are our gateway to the entire region.
I could take the rest of the evening and talk about that.
Well, we'll limit you a little bit.
I've just come off of spending 10 years taking a container terminal expansion or new container terminal through an environmental assessment process, a federal environmental assessment process. And you can't take 10 years for us to get a project approved. And I can tell you at the end, it wasn't even certain it was going to be approved. And after 10 years, we're a port authority. So, we have a lot more risk tolerance in terms of, okay, we're going to make this investment and we're going to do everything we can to get it across the line. I can't see a private sector company going and spending the kind of resources we had to do that. And so we have to change that in Canada. That's absolutely essential that we change that. And if you just look at some of, we actually in the port, we're a permitting authority. One of the things that I'm responsible for is our permitting. And last year, we permitted, we issued 136 permits for $1 billion worth of infrastructure in the port. Yet it takes 10 years to get one new container terminal approved through the federal process. That can't be how it's done. And moreover, I'd say that it's interesting, the work that we've done with Indigenous communities to support those projects. I was actually, in the end of last year and the beginning of this year, I was in Ottawa, I think 4 times with 2 First Nations telling the government to speed up. And I can't tell you how powerful that is when you're sitting in those offices and you've got leadership from First Nations sitting there saying, what is taking so long? We want a decision. And so I agree completely. There's an amazing opportunity there. We've only in the last number of years begun to understand that and embrace that. And I think there's a huge, huge opportunity there. And I want to touch on one other thing, because we were talking about LNG. And this is not a big LNG project. It's an important LNG project, and that is Fortis's Tilbury Marine Jetty on the Fraser River, which is also stuck in the environmental assessment process. And we're waiting for hopefully a positive provincial decision soon. And that project, we have done all the risk assessments years ago in the port to be able to provide LNG bunkering to fuel
at a site where there is LNG.
Yeah, and we're ready to do it. And now I have cruise lines saying we want to bring LNG ships to Vancouver in 2024. And where are we? We don't have that facility, and it can't take this long. It can't take this long, and that's just LNG. Yeah. We're hearing about shipping lines are investing now in dual fuel methanol vessels. How do we get a green methanol supply here so that we can take advantage of that opportunity? So I see it everywhere. And so absolutely, regulation and getting these things approved is critical.
So Sukesh, you are very connected to the relationship that we have with India. When you're representing us in those meetings, how are we viewed? Are we seen as the country that can't get things done?
So let me start by saying that, first of all, the diplomatic relations, clearly these days are pretty tense right now. It will take some time to get the resolve, and my hope is both governments work together to get this issue resolved. We think that media in Canada is sometimes harsh and strong. Media in India is even 10 times worse kind of thing on that. So if they go on negative news, that goes out into the market. Unfortunately, right now, we're not in the good way. And I think I'm not saying one government or the other government. My point there is that both governments need to find a way to resolve this issue on diplomatic relations that's going on right now. Having said that, I think the B2B clearly has to kind of continue. And one thing we don't realize actually is maybe just a couple of stats, and we'll come back to a little bit directly your question, that the funds from Canada, including our pension funds and some of the larger funds, including Fairfax, they've invested of over $70 billion US into India. Okay, not small numbers. And if you look at the trade activity, and I think, Duncan, you might have a better idea. I think now India is becoming the fourth largest, I'll say, country in the sense of the trade volumes export into that region. So I think it's becoming more and more kind of critical on that. Having said that, still, I think the brand with respect to people connection is still pretty strong. Okay, G2G, question mark right now, but the B2B, when dealing with Canada, there's still respect there and stuff like that. But the point you raised earlier about, specifically about getting things done, in fact, Indian Oil has also invested partially through the LNG project, which people might not realize huge, which never went through. So they're also picking up on this point that Canada, can you get things done? Okay, so I think the point that I could made and all the other panel members, very, very important that we deliver. And if we don't, guess what? They're going to find the stuff from somewhere else. They're not going to stop. The consumption there is so huge. If you look at it right now, we're talking about, I'll just pick on India for a minute, the fastest, growth in the middle class in the world right now. 65% of the population is 35 and below. Biggest consumer market right now, biggest workforce, they're spending, they're consuming. If we're not there, somebody else is there. So I think from a reputation perspective, clearly there is a bit of a question mark right now because of things you heard right now. But having said that, I think brand is still, from a B2B, is strong, and people-to-people ties are even stronger that we should take advantage of and go to the next level as such.
I want to ask Samaya here in just a moment to play a clip from Sam Roscoe from Sauder School of Business, because I had asked him about supply chains. How are they affected by tensions in relationships? Interesting thought from him. Can you roll that clip, Samaya?
BC businesses and their supply chains don't like uncertainty. There's been a lot of uncertainty between Canada's relationship with China. It's been going on probably since 2016 for various reasons. That uncertainty is exacerbated as a result of COVID, the zero COVID policy in China, rolling lockdowns and production stoppages in China. And it's gotten to a point now where that uncertainty has lasted 5, 6, almost 7, 8 years now. And businesses are really looking at their need to change and move their sources of supply. And one of the primary beneficiaries of that has been India. And India has one of the countries, when we talk about friendshoring, they are the country that has received a lot of that production capacity is moved from China into India. And we're seeing more and more of that, particularly in the electronics industry. So a lot of the goods that we used to be purchasing here in BC as consumers from Best Buy and the like have come from China. Over the next 10 years, 15 years, we're going to see a lot of those products coming in from India instead.
Interesting changes. And I think to your point, Duncan, that in the short run, when there may be some diplomatic challenge, we're not going to see those B2B relationships affected. But if they drag on, that becomes the fundamental issue. Jeff, from your perspective, how important is it that we work towards healing this relationship with India so that it doesn't drag on and put impediments in our way that would prevent us from having robust relationships as possible?
Well, I think it's important not only for the effects that it may have on trade and investment, and there's no question, as Sukesh mentioned, the Indian domestic media has been feverish about Canada since September 18th, when Prime Minister Trudeau made his announcement in the House of Commons. So it remains to be seen what kind of medium to long-term damage that will do to the Canadian brand. But as Sukesh has pointed out, also the brand is fundamentally strong in Indian society. But it's important to have a good relationship with India in spite of these kinds of difficulties, and in spite of values that are not under current governance are not totally aligned, because India is rapidly increasing its influence as a strategic player in the region and in the world, and so there is a strategic dimension to these relationships that can have long-term effects on Canadian interests, and how seriously Canada is taken as a player, how much Canada's voice is listened to in the councils of the world, certainly is affected, at least to some extent, by situations where you have these kind of difficult relationships with two major players on the world scene. That said, on a societal level, on a business to business level, life does go on, and there is enormous potential for Canada to build relationships in Southeast Asia, which was mentioned at the outset of the discussion, is itself rapidly the countries of Southeast Asia, and there are significant differences among them, of course, but they are experiencing very rapid economic growth on a sustained basis, and they're also becoming, gradually they're becoming more influential in regional affairs and in global affairs, and I think there is, if you're a glass half full kind of person, you would say we have generally a pretty good brand in that part of the world, and goodwill. But we have to prove ourselves to be reliable partners. And the things we talked about earlier, energy exports being a prime example of that. If we can't deliver on the things that those countries need and have top of mind, and really the top of mind things, you talk to leaders in the region, in countries in the Indo-Pacific region, it is energy security and it's food security. And Canada could be a big part of the solution on both of those things if we can get out of our own way.
And Jeff, it's as though you anticipated the question, and I'm just going to have Sean Reed from Slido, one of our viewers, is asking much the same, and I would like to come along. And Sukesh, maybe get you to respond first after Sean reads the question.
The question is, Canada's a trading nation, and the Asia-Pacific needs our LNG, lumber, foodstuffs, and fertilizers. Given the challenges with China and now India, would it make more sense to focus on other nations, Japan, Korea, Thailand, and the like?
Sukesh?
Yeah, I think obviously we need to focus on wherever the opportunity is, but to say we're going to walk away from two largest markets, I'm not sure any business leader will make that decision. They're going to find a way to get engaged. Just give you an example of, we talked about, food security. If you talk to, and I had a chance to connect with Premier Scott Moe a few weeks ago, like for Saskatchewan, India is a very, very strategic market. Look at lentils, pulses. You look at some of the other, minerals they're looking for, the potash and others. Very, very critical. India, Canada has what India needs, and India has what Canada needs as the market. Lentils and pulses is a basic necessity, basic food, and we have abundance of that. To say that we can walk away and find other, market opportunities, I don't think that's the right strategy. We got to find a way to get more deeper into that market where the demand is, and clearly that's there in India. If you go and chance to look at the port operations, and I had a chance to look at the Mundra port a few years ago when I was there. This is in Gujarat. The amount of scale, the volume that they're carrying right now, and that I know you guys are quite busy here, lots of happening at the Vancouver port, but you go there and look at the volume that's coming through, because the sheer demand that is in India, why Canada should not be taking a bigger stake in that opportunity? That's there. We got to find a way to take advantage of that.
Well, finding that way. Jeff, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah. Just to circle back to the question that Sean read. It's interesting when we talk to the major agri-food producer groups, and here we're talking not only about about commodities that go in bulk, like grains and oilseeds and potash, which is a critical part of an agri-food system, but also talking about ingredients that go into food. So we're a world leader in alternative forms of protein that are used by food manufacturers in these markets to put the protein into products, snack foods, pet foods, and so on. And when you talk to these producer associations, what they're telling us is that China for most of them is their biggest market, and they see that continuing, and they're not looking. Most of them are hoping to continue, the volumes they have, but at the same time they say that it is not a dependable market, and they don't want to have to rely on it because of the political system in China and the risk of arbitrary measures, and I think also decreasing confidence in the ability of the current government of China under Xi Jinping. Now that he's sort of unconstrained by term limits and has clearly taken very firm control of the party and government apparatus, there's decreasing confidence in the quality of economic governance and economic policy decision making in China. So they're not looking to grow there. And Japan and Korea, for many of them, figure as number 2 or number 3 for their products. But with the demographics and the growth potential they see as not so great, it's Southeast Asia where they're putting their new effort, and they are making trade missions there. Agriculture, Canada is establishing under this federal government Indo-Pacific strategy, establishing a new office, a hub in Southeast Asia. They just named the executive director for it, who is a woman who was Canada's consul general to Mumbai until very recently, but before that she was Canada's ambassador to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Deirdre Kelly, and they're going to be standing up that office over the course of the next year. And the aim there is, having consulted with the agri-food producing communities and the companies, is that's where they want to lean in and really see if they can crack open new markets. And there's a lot of things that you have to do in doing that, especially addressing non-tariff barriers. But that's where they are. Businesses are putting their money into this. It's not just a government deciding this would be a cool thing to do. Government is getting the message from business that that's where they want to spend, invest their resources and time to develop new relationships and explore new opportunities. And when it comes to India, there are some commodities where it's a fantastic market, but it is also seen as and there's no question, it's the fastest growing large economy in the world. The growth potential offered there and favorable demographics, it is tremendous, but it does also have a reputation of being a difficult place in which to establish yourself, especially if you're a smaller player, and with a policy environment that can be very difficult to navigate. And there is a perception, I think, in our agri-food sector at least, that there are more welcoming environments to be found in some of the countries in Southeast Asia, and that's why they're voting with their feet and making the trip there. It's the farthest part of the world from central Canada. You can't go farther than Singapore on this globe.
So in an interview that I did with Laura Alfaro from Harvard Business School, she had co-written a paper that they presented at the Jackson Hole, Wyoming Economic Summit back in August, and was talking about the great relocation within the Indo-Pacific region. And primarily that was supply chains to the United States and American companies moving out of China into Vietnam, South Korea, Japan being a benefactor, Taiwan, and Mexico. But what has been pointed out is that, yes, those relationships are changing, but China is moving into all of those other economies and they're making direct foreign investments there because they can't do the same in the United States. So, Mike, I know that in our pre-briefing, you were talking about the fact that we have to have different strategies with different countries and organizations that we're dealing with. But how important is it that individual businesses be leading the charge, saying, these are the countries that I want to be able to establish those working relationships with?
Used to say, what governments can do is open some doors, but business has to make the sale. They have to close the deal. We talk about the changing dynamic. I was listening to Jeff, and I think his emphasis on the strategic importance of what is taking place. Jeff, people are going to think we're talking about this at the barbershop. But it really is important for us to make, in my view, Stu, to make this transition as a country. We have all said it. I think most of this audience would say it. We have a feel-good brand. We don't have a do-good brand, right? That's the transition we have to make, and we're talking about alternative markets. Anyone in this audience bought furniture lately? Jeez, glad I'm not married to you. I did get married, and we bought some furniture. It's all from Vietnam.
Vietnam, yeah.
It's all from Vietnam, and except for the stuff that came with my wife from France, but that's a different story. It's old, like me. But the dynamic is changing there, and I mean, Sukesh said we're not going to turn our backs on the two largest markets that account for almost 4 billion people, but let's also recognize that there are other emerging opportunities that for a country like ours, that if we're smart, we can be a little bit more agile and adept. We can create those shipping partnerships. I want to start posing questions here, but I've always been fascinated about how here we are, we tout ourselves and are not just Canada's major port, but major port in North America, and we have very little shipping support services headquartered here. Why is that? Well, because we haven't made much of an effort to attract them here. Whether it's in the insurance sector, whether it's in the other financing sector, I'm not suggesting the Onassis shipping line is going to relocate from Athens to Vancouver, but their regional center. And the slide that you put up at the outset that troubles me the most, Stu, was the last slide from Conseco that said most Canadians, most British Columbians don't think of us as part of the Asia-Pacific. And it's up to politicians, leaders, to help people come to terms with how we very much are, and our future is very much tied to the Asia-Pacific.
I would like to roll a clip now from Senator Yuen-Pao Wu, and he addresses another what I think is important issue that I want to put to all of you on the panel. Samaya, can you please roll that clip?
We're Boy Scouts, and we do it with the best of intentions. We value what we have in this country. I value what we have in this country, freedom of speech and movement of political views. And we want to share it with the world. That's a good thing. We should never turn our backs on the freedoms and the liberties and the rights that we have over time developed in this country that's made us stronger and better. But our ability to change other countries is limited. And for too much of our history, our diplomatic history with China, we have worked on the premise that we want to change China. And we've done it, in part through trade, for example. We've said, well, if we trade with them, if we take more Chinese students, if we have more cultural exchanges, eventually they'll come to their senses, right? And they'll see that we have the better way, and why wouldn't they want to be more like us? We have to stop that way of thinking. We have to stop the idea that a measure of Canadian success in its foreign policy with China is that China ends up looking more like us. That is an implicit part of our foreign policy goal. 20 years from now, China is going to look more like us because our good influence on them will have led to that outcome. It may look a bit more like us in 20 years, but it wouldn't be because of our efforts. It would be because of their own domestic impetus through political and civil society movements that bring change about in China. And we've just got to stop the idea of trying to change China.
Indira, I saw you lean in.
Well, he's correct. I think that, we are going through this phase that all of a sudden we can't deal with China. We've decided that, our values don't align, all the issues that have taken place. I think it's important to realize that if we are truly an open, democratic, liberal country as we say we are, then we should be able to respect their approach, right? We should not be the ones who are preaching in terms of how they manage their affairs, given the size difference. And I think, Henry Kissinger passed away recently, 100 years old. He was on the Trilateral Commission, and he had some good advice on this subject. He said, you cannot decouple from China. He said, the cost is too great. You have to continue to do business in non-sensitive areas and maintain that relationship. Secondly, he said, you have to, don't start a war, right, over Taiwan. And thirdly, he said, as democratic governments, we should be able to be ones who are open about, how we respect our values and other people's values. And he was right on. I mean, the summary is don't poke the dragon if you don't have to. And I think that, I'm on a couple of boards where we're continuing to do business in China. And of course, geopolitical risk in China is very high on the board's agenda. But in sectors like automotive, China is the largest automotive producer in the world. You can't walk away from that. They're leading in the production of electric vehicles. Their EVs are being sold all over Europe. So maybe I'm just pragmatic, right? The reality is these issues come and go, and we have to find a way as a small country to do what's best for our citizens, which includes finding a way to navigate. My final point is Australia, that had some major issues with China, have figured it out. They have reached some kind of an arrangement where they've decided they're not going to poke the dragon gratuitously either. And their principles are collaborate where you can, disagree behind closed doors, right? And agree to disagree, and don't amplify disagreements. And I think that's Australia's philosophy, and it's working for them in terms of their resources. So I think we need to, when it comes to China, we need to really be very mindful of what we're going through right now.
But do we not also need to be mindful of that same attitude in all of those countries in the Indo-Pacific region? Sukesh.
Yeah, I think the comment was made was quite valid. But having said that, I think we stand for our values in Canada. I think we, but the key thing is that how do you communicate? And I think you talked about behind closed doors, so there are issues. We should put it up on the table, have a conversation. And the biggest thing is, people do business with people. The governments form relationship with the governments through trust. And the ongoing dialogue, ongoing communication, ongoing relationships are very, very critical. And I think the comment that was made earlier, Senator, was the fact that you can also respect other countries and their way of kind of doing things. And obviously we have to speak up if something is fundamentally wrong and that's impacting us as a country. But we have to balance it out a little bit with how we approach it, how we communicate. But I'm never going to say that we compromise our values. That has to be kind of up there. But it's more about how those get dealt with and how do we build that trust, which is so critical. Because without that, I think, nothing will kind of work. But I'll say one thing, just on a kind of tied to the similar topic. Although we have frozen, the domestic, I'll say G2G relationship between Canada and China, but the volumes of the trade has not dropped actually. If you look at it, and Duncan, you can speak to it a little bit. We find a way to get through all that, whether it's B2B or whatever it is, to make it work. The volumes have not dropped. Okay, so again, I use the same kind of analogy for India, but part of it too. There's been some issues with the G2G and clearly serious issues that governments should work through in both governments. But that should not impact the trade and the investment that we're going through. Hopefully that continues and flourishes.
Duncan, you said earlier that in dealing with many of our trading partners, you meet with them and you say, we can bring a tremendous sort of suite of experience and expertise in addressing large-scale societal issues. Are we really at odds with so many of these countries in the Indo-Pacific, or actually we're probably fairly closely aligned? And if that's the case, why don't we just work together rather than sitting there virtue signaling?
Well, in my case, I'm mostly dealing with business people, so we're not. I'm not encountering a lot of that. The differences. I'm encountering a lot of places where we have things in common, and we're working to build things in common. And yes, we've maintained through all of the ups and downs with both China and now India. We've maintained trade with those countries, and those business to business relationships continue to happen. India, when I started the port 20 years ago, wasn't even in the top 10 of our trading partners. And it was number 4 last year. I think it's number 5 this year, but it'll probably be number 4 again very soon. And we're seeing really large volumes also with Indonesia and Malaysia. When we think about how, I just want to pick up a little bit in terms of Canada's positioning and how we manage this, I'm pretty passionate about human rights, but I mean, how do you balance that as a relatively small country? And partway through this trip, I actually started the trip, believe it or not, in Regina, talking to the premier about exactly what we're talking about here. But I was in the Middle East, and somebody in the Middle East said to me, they were very upset about how they're doing business. They do a lot of business here in Canada. They were very upset about Canada's positioning around a lot of these, around India and around some other things in the Middle East. And the comment back to you is, why do you have to get out in front of your allies so much? Can't you work as a bloc, as a group? Why does Canada have to go out there and take it all on the chin? And it seems to me that we need to do more of that. Why do we have to be, the big one that goes out and makes those pronouncements? I think we can probably take the temperature down a lot by thinking about that more carefully. So that would be my perspective on it.
So why do we? Mike, you've got thoughts on this. Why do we decide that we have to step out in front of our allies and say this is the way we all must live our lives?
I don't think we should ever be shy about telling the world what we believe in. It's a little more difficult and risky when you start telling other people what they should believe in. Mm-hmm. Look, I'm a living testament to the challenges associated with governing 4.5 million people. Those that have been in the government of Canada live with the challenges of governing 35 million people. I'm not going to presume to tell someone how to govern 2 billion people. Although I, like all of us, have some views on the sanctity importance of individual human rights. We convey that, I think, by demonstrating who we are as Canadians and what we believe in. And I think by and large we do a pretty good job of that. How out front? I'll give you a quick anecdote. Sukesh probably knows this, but what government in the world was the first to issue government-backed bonds in both Indian currency and yuan, Chinese currency? Which government in the world? It was the government of British Columbia. We were at the leading edge of that. Now, I'll tell you this. Today, I would do it in India. I wouldn't do it in China. Because that's a way we have to send a signal that the relationship government to government isn't as where it needs to be. we have to think strategically, as Jeff said, about where it is and how we choose to send these signals without cutting off our nose to spite ourselves. And that's something that historically Canadians have been pretty good at. We seem to have missed a bit on that of late, but I think we can get back there.
Jeff?
Yeah, and I think it's this is fundamental, and as I think all of us have agreed, we don't want to shy away from expressing in what we believe in. But I think it's really important to note that there are ways to do that. And I was a diplomat for Canada. I was Consul General of Canada for 5 years in Hong Kong during the protests and the imposition of the national security law. And, that was a case where we worked very closely with allies, with like-minded democracies, with the US, with the UK, Australia, New Zealand at times, Western Europe, some individual countries, and the European Union, quite importantly. And we issued a number of joint statements, and we took actions that were coordinated. And Canada can be proud of the actions that we took and the positions that we expressed, knowing also that that was a case where we didn't get out in front of the others in that grouping, which is a pretty good grouping in the world to be in. In fact, it was the Americans who occasionally got out in front with their rhetoric. But there are ways of doing these things, and I think the most effective way, in international diplomacy, and the appropriate way for us as Canadians, is number one, to be principled in the views that we express. There is a network, a system of international agreements stemming from the UN Declaration on Human Rights that have been very broadly agreed, including by countries like China. And we've built a system under which we are called to hold ourselves and each other to account. And so Canada opens itself to scrutiny in international human rights bodies, and we invite visits by rapporteurs. That can be awkward. We don't like what they say, but we think it's important to do that, and we set an example by doing it. And I think the countries that are effective, and there are a number of European countries that I think can provide a good model on this, that they are effective in conveying their views in the international system and publicly in interactions involving countries like China. They do it from a place of principle, basing it always on what has been agreed to, and saying, look, these are obligations that we all have, and we have an obligation to hold each other to account. And, in terms of whether you keep all these things private or take them public, I think it's quite important to be public, to do it in a respectful way. And again, I would say in a principled, consistent way. Don't call out, one country when you're not calling out others by the same standard. And that can be awkward at times. But it's also quite important. Like, when my kids have kids, I don't want those kids to grow up in a world where it's been agreed that we all keep quiet when we see really egregious violations, things like torture, like genocide, places where people disappear in the night and their families never hear from them, and it's done at the hands of the state. We should be working together to uphold a system where that kind of thing is understood to be not okay. And the other reason for doing it publicly is it creates friction for those who do these things. It imposes some degree of cost. And I really believe, certainly from my experience of interactions with China as a diplomat over 3 decades, that in that system they are conscious of the costs that come with certain action. You can tell that from the reaction when they are called out on something. They do react in a way that makes you feel like it's important to them. And if they didn't care, they wouldn't react that way. So, but you can we have to deal with the world as it is, not the world that we wish would exist. And that means we have, we need to do business with countries all over the world in a way that we can make our way in the world and have prosperity for Canadians to enjoy, to be able to fulfill themselves. But you can do that without abandoning all standards and just saying, we're going to be complicit in things that are repugnant to basic human values.
John, can we go to the first question here from Slido, because I think it's a very interesting one in light of what Jeff has just been talking about.
A question from Justin Yee. What is one thing Canada can do to support the security of our democratic allies in the Asia-Pacific in an increasingly unstable geopolitical landscape?
And I think this speaks an awful lot to what the American agenda is as well, because that is an element that we have to look to. Indira.
You're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Democratic values? Well, I think as a small country, there are several ways. I come back to education, helping to educate those populations about democratic governance, what works. Sri Lanka, I came from Sri Lanka, where the democracy has disintegrated over 75 years. And I think partly it's because, and I really appreciate what Jeff said, countries have not held successive governments to account. So we need to stand up when values that ultimately compromise the freedoms of the citizens and reduces their quality of living, we need to call them out. Sri Lanka was one country that I think Canada had a major role to play in terms of the ethnic violence there. And I think it's just us being willing to stand up for democracies when necessary. So I think it's just all of those things that really Jeff said it very well. Standing up for our values, which is what I meant earlier. By standing up for your values, you don't necessarily have to accuse others of not doing so, but you do stand up for your values, and you say these are the standards which we hold people accountable for. So I think democracy is part of that value set: freedom of the press, independent judiciary, and essentially free and fair elections.
So something that I want to put to all of you is that we have not talked about the United States tonight, because they are part of Asia Pacific as well, and they are a dominant force and player. And the perception is that they're not too happy with us in our strategy right now. How important is it in the long term that we recognize that where the United States goes, they want us to go there with them. Otherwise, they're not taking us. How important is that relationship? Sukesh, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, I think it's pretty important kind of thing. I think we have a very strong ties between Canada and the U.S. But if you look at it lately in some of those, I won't go into details, but some of the meetings that have taken place, Canada is not on the table on a number of those meetings. That's concerning if you think about it, that have we lost that importance of being on the table for very important conversations, especially when you're talking about the whole, some of the discussion on the whole Indo-Pacific with defense and in other areas, some key points. So I think we got to also make sure that on both sides that Canada is also being proactive and working very closely with our strongest ally and our strongest neighbor for us to show that we are here to support and being involved, being engaged. And the U.S. also needs to realize that the importance of Canada as an ally as two neighbors kind of thing on that. But I think in some of those, and it's in the press and the media kind of thing on that we were missing on some of those important discussions, and we were not on the table.
Mike?
I think the Americans are looking at us right now and are confused. I don't think they discern a coherent strategy on our part. I think there are times when we as Canadians over the last few years have looked south and had the same problem. A year into my marriage, I can tell you when partners don't, because I'm pretty much an expert now, Stu. When partners don't understand what each other's objectives are, they're going to have difficulty working together to achieve that objective. Canada and the US, for all of the conversations we've had today about the fundamental importance, I mean, your last question, I was going to say, what's the one thing Canada can do strategically in the geopolitical sense? It is, in my view, to forge closer relationships with India. I mean, I just think that is so fundamentally important today for a whole host of reasons. But that does not diminish the importance, the fundamentally underlying foundational importance of our relationship with the US. And Churchill called it the special relationship during the Second World War and in the years following. That is that same mantra applies more than ever to us with the U.S. And I think there's an obligation on the part of both countries to sit down with one another and make sure and establish a clear understanding and clear agreement on what our objectives are going forward, dealing certainly with the world, but also with Asia and Indo-Pacific.
Duncan, from your perspective, how important is our relationship with our largest trading partner and coupled with our strategy moving into Indo-Pacific?
Well, I think you heard me speak earlier about my perspective in terms of working with our allies more closely, and I think that's fundamental. And the United States is our best friend. And no matter what, and we will have challenges, and we've certainly seen a bit bumpier road with our best friend over the last number of years, but it's a critical relationship, as is the relationship with our other allies. And to the extent that's possible, I agree with what Mike is saying in terms of, understanding each other's objectives. And to the extent that we have mutual objectives or there's alignment, we should be working very closely with them. And I think for the most part, we will. And there will be areas where Canada maybe needs to take a different path. But if we're very clear about what we're doing, if we're building that understanding, and it doesn't look like we're doing things in a haphazard manner, they'll probably have more comfort in us doing those things than they would in the current circumstance. So I think the U.S. relationship is really key, but not just the U.S. I would say our other allies, in particular, other Five Eye allies.
Jeff?
I think very simply, we need to spend a lot more on defense. This is fundamental, and it's not coming only from the Americans, although it's very important to the Americans that we do, but also our European allies are privately and publicly urging Canadian leaders to get serious about Canada's defense spending. And I would say in terms of how Washington sees Canada these days, I would say I think Washington is a little happier since this Indo-Pacific strategy of the government came out a year ago, because it did deliver messages. It positioned Canada, for instance, vis-a-vis China, calling China a disruptive global power, and the investments that have been made in defense under the strategy, which are the largest spending items under the strategy, have been welcomed. But we have been a free rider among our friends and allies for too long. We need to spend a lot more on defense. And governments of both of the parties that have been in government in Canada are equally guilty of having neglected this for a couple of generations now. And I've got something also for the doves, not just for the hawks. We also need to spend a lot more on official development assistance. Canadians are generally surprised to find that we are among the least generous on a per capita basis relative to our income. We are among the least generous of the developed countries when it comes to the portion of our national income that we devote to official development assistance, and that's noticed. So we just need to summon the political will to make those investments if we want to be taken seriously in Washington and other capitals.
So, to wrap up here, Indira, I want to start with you because I watch and see you listening to what's been happening in our discussion today, and we all have thoughts about what's the most important thing that we want somebody to take away from what we've been talking about tonight, having listened to one another, but also having our own thoughts. So what would you like members of our audience to take away from this discussion today? And then I'm going to ask each of you the same question.
So I would like people to take away the opportunity Canada has with respect to impact on an issue that is enormously important to the Asia-Pacific and to the world, Indo-Pacific, and that is energy and energy security. If there is one problem that I think will help the region thrive is access to secure and cheaper energy with lower environmental impact. Not to mention that we don't believe in renewables and supporting all of that. But our ability to play an important role in that area where we can punch clearly above our weight, I think is a message I'd like people to take away. And the support public needs to provide or make clear to governments the importance of removing all of the hurdles that prevent Canada from playing that role.
Mike, same question. What do you want people to take away from this discussion tonight?
We have this powerful brand. Like, it's incredibly powerful. Makes people feel good. They think good things when they think of us. And when you're on a panel like this and you hear learned people, you understand that we have the talent, we have the folks that can create those relationships and create those opportunities that will serve not just Canadians but people in other countries, and we have to do it. I mean, we talked a lot about India today. Is there a more fundamental, are the fundamentals, could they be more sound? A common law heritage, or members of the Commonwealth. I mean, the similarities in India, you've got, we make a big deal about having 2 official languages. There are 28 language groups, but the language of business is English. I mean, all the fundamentals are there, but even beyond India, we walk into the room with a brand that people feel good about, but now we have to demonstrate that they can do more than feel good. They can do good. We can accomplish things. And that is going to take a collective effort. And there is a role for government and there is a role for the private sector. And both have to step up beyond what we have done thus far.
Duncan, your closing thoughts.
The world wants what Canada has, and we need to be better at being able to give the world what we have. And that's energy is a key area for certain. Another area is that we talked about earlier tonight is critical minerals. When I saw the federal government strategy on critical minerals, I thought, that's great. Now, how do we get those projects approved? So we need to get out of our own way in terms of getting these things done. By doing that, not only are we going to enhance our economic well-being, but we're going to help contribute to democracy and stability in the world. And we have seen the opportunity that was squandered as a result of not being able to get these projects approved in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. If we could have stepped up in a quick manner, if we should have been in the place already to have done that, if we could have stepped up in a quick manner, we could have brought a lot of stability to our partners, and we weren't able to do that. So I think we're letting the world down, and I think that's what we need to do.
Jeff.
About our defense and aid spending, as I've said, I think we need to get serious about having a national infrastructure. We're the only major economy among our peers not to have a national infrastructure strategy, and we need to get serious about being a reliable energy supplier. Our allies in in Asia in particular, desperately want this from us. And I think we need to make our foreign policy, and again, this is not a knock on one party or another, it's a knock on all of them. We need to make our foreign policy based on our national interest and not on narrow domestic political considerations. And we've had the luxury, for too long, we've had the luxury of being able to do those things and of not being strategic. I think we've now realized that we can't afford that luxury anymore. The things are catching up with us, and we need to get serious.
Sukesh, we'll wrap up with you.
Great, thanks, Stu. I think if you look at it, one message or one learning takeaway is we talked about the Indo-Pacific region, we talked about China and India, but it's a vast, you're looking at 40 countries or so. If you're looking at Pakistan, looking at other kind of countries as such, it's a big market. And I think Canada has a very important role to play. And the role is around food security, energy security, and that is the betterment and the development of that region. Okay, so if we take our self-interest out, let's for the time being, just for the the growth and the fulfillment, and also the fact the need that is there for those two, Canada has a very, very important role to play. Now, indirectly, we will benefit from that because we have our resources, our technology, our know-how that can contribute. So I think it's a win-win situation for the biggest region who's looking for what we have got, and we have to find a way to contribute. And in that process, that's good for Canada, that's good for Canadians, that makes the world better.
I agree. It's interesting that you mentioned Pakistan. We have the Consul General from Pakistan joining us in the audience tonight, as well as the Consul General from the UK, because two countries also who are very, very invested in what is happening in the region.
Glad I mentioned Churchill.
Now you've thrown me off my... The discussion is big, the opportunities are enormous, and this requires further conversation. It's a panel that we'll come back to in the future. Thank you all for your time tonight. We burned through 90 minutes in no time, and I think we've only scratched the surface. So thank you for your time. Thank you for everybody's time in the audience here, online. And very, very importantly, I want to thank our sponsors who have made this evening possible. RBC, KPMG, Helijet, of course, and then our ongoing annual sponsors, Stem Cell Technologies, BD, Landlord BC, Fortis BC, Polygon, the Digital Supercluster Research Co. at Vancouver Sun and BCIT. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to put on this series, which I think is filling a very important information gap. So thank you tonight.
Thank you for tuning into Conversations Live, an Oh Boy Productions program. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find our previous and upcoming episodes at conversationslive.ca. You can also follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Again, thank you. I'm Stuart McNish.